Hello and welcome back to The Best Advice. I'm thrilled to have Dr. Denis Cauvier here today, and we're going to be talking about the 4 different generations that are now in the workforce together. So Denis, I see initially that that's a huge substance, like beauty, all these 4 different generations bringing different things together. However, I also hear through my clients that there's a lot of conflict in the workforce. Would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, it's unfortunate, but there is some conflict, which is unfortunate. It's amazing. It is the first time in history that we've ever had 4 distinct demographic groups. And the interesting thing, and which is also the challenge, is the shaping forces that really created these 4 unique things, 4 different groups. I think one of the opportunities, or how to get beyond the challenges, is to become multilingual, to start to learn the languages. In other words, boomers to start to learn the languages of the veterans, of the millennials, of the Gen X's. And you know, it's like, I'll make a crude analogy. Let's say, for example, you and I were part of a trip of a bunch of colleagues, and we're going to a foreign country, let's say Italy. Let's say we don't speak any Italian, but we learn just 2 or 3 basic words, and we go into a restaurant, and we just try our words, and not try to impress upon anybody, but rather just to show respect. I guarantee, even by our accent, they'll figure we're English, and they'll do their best to meet us halfway by speaking some English. See, it's not that we have to be experts at these different languages. If we take a sincere attempt to understand and meet somebody in the middle, people will always come back. You know, and sometimes, you know, I listen to some of the boomers, and they're talking about the 2 younger demographics, which are so different on the surface. And they'll say, you know, the younger folks are so flaky, you know, they change jobs more quicker than they change underwear, kind of, you know, stuff. In my day, you know, but you have to understand the shaping forces, right? You see, the shaping forces for the younger demographics, for example, you come home, and this was often the case, is that some young person would be at home, and they're sitting at home, the TV's on, they got the mobile in their hand, they've got the iPad in the other hand, a TV dinner's on their lap, there's a math book, and the TV's on, and, you know, and mom or dad will say, "What are you doing? Homework?" And they are. They're multitaskers. So some of the older folks will say, well, they don't have attention span, they're flaky. The reality is that they are so wired that they're able to do all this and multitask. So shouldn't we be embracing this?
Right.
The same token, the younger demographic should be understanding the benefits of the boomers and the veterans and what they bring to the table. It's about finding common ground.
Yeah, and the first thing that comes to my mind is the Gen X. They don't like to be bored, right? Because they're so used to stimulating. So the older generations can teach them.
Absolutely.
Right? It's not about being bored. What about self-motivation? What about learning how to deal with the mundane? Because there's always something in a job that's mundane, right? There's lots of interchange.
Yeah, really good point. In fact, one of the things is, and this is where I think the thinking can be very flawed. As we said, typically boomer reaction to the younger demographics is, well, they keep on changing jobs. So the natural byproduct of that thought is, why would I invest in these people if they're only going to leave? Now that's actually counterintuitive. I'll tell you why. See, the reality is that the younger demographics, because a lot of the traditional institutions, even traditional marriage, religion, school, even the notion of lifelong employment has all gone by the wayside for all these young people. So what they've learned is that they have to rely on themselves. Okay, so what they're looking for, as you're saying, they're looking for an engaged experience, and they're looking for opportunities to learn. If they feel it's become stagnant, you're just making it easy for them to want to leave. One of the best ways to keep young people is to keep on training them, mentoring them, give them exciting projects. Now that's counterintuitive. The baby boomer would say, I wouldn't want to do that because I'm just going to invest all this money so they go and become great value for my competition. And the reality is, if you keep it exciting, you're going to keep them there with you much longer, and they'll be engaged. They're going to be peak performers.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. And when you talk this way, do they get it?
I'm sorry, just who get it?
Do the company people get it when you're speaking?
Actually, most do.
Okay,
most
good.
do. Yeah,
okay.
yeah. To say that I can affect change with every single person in my speeches or one-on-one, no. But normally, you know, on like for example, with the consulting practice, going in and talking about some changes in corporate culture, absolutely. You know, we'll invest the time and energy, and we'll back it up with real examples, and we'll take them through a logical step-by-step process and coach them on how the various different groups on how to speak the language and show them the benefits of it. So yes, wise people do see the benefits of this.
Yeah. Well, I have to add a comment. I went to see the new James Bond movie. Have you seen it?
Not yet, no.
Skyfall?
Yeah.
And they portray James Bond and M, his boss,
Yes.
as being old, that it's time for retirement. But in the end, he gets a villain by actually using the old ways that they used to. So, but it also had the new ways in there with the younger generation. And I thought it was a very good example of how the two different generations can work together.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
That's a
and
great...
4 would be, you know, yeah. So I was watching, I'm thinking, wow, this really fits with this TV show I'm doing tomorrow. Whoa, I got to take notes. Okay, I've got another question for you. With regards to, as a psychotherapist, I see a lot of people who are CEOs, who are senior managers coming in, burnout, long-term, short-term disability, and not only are they high achievers, but they are also falling into the perfectionistic tendency, which is often what I help people see is often underlying a fear of failure. I got to do it right. I got to do it right, and drive. But then I also see them in toxic environments, like we started to talk about a few minutes ago, and it's not about judging. It could be a misalignment.
Yeah.
What are people to do, if you could expand on that a little bit more?
I would say, and taking from the great advice that you started the show with, about taking a moment, take a step back, and really looking internally. And I call this a MAP program. So if you want to visualize a triangle, so the map would be M-A-P, and M stands for market, A stands for authenticity, and the P is for passion. And I would say start with the passion. In other words, ask yourself, what am I passionate about? We all have to work for a living, but to find either a business or an occupation that you're passionate about and you get paid well to do, it doesn't even seem like work. No. And I know a lot of people that they're just so disconnected with their work because that passion is not there. And I think that's just such a terrible way to go through life. Oh, yeah. But if you find what you're passionate about, then the next thing is, ask yourself, is there a market for this? In other words, is there a market where some consumer will pay for this? Maybe I can have a business out of it. Or is there a market where an employer will pay me to provide something of service that I'm passionate? And then the A for the authenticity is ask yourself, do I have the skills, the competencies, the knowledge base to be a real provider of that? So if you visualize this triangle, imagine where these three elements all converge in the center. That's what I call your sweet spot. You'll never burn out in your sweet spot. See, it's like, take for example your hobbies or other interests. You come home after a busy day at the office or wherever you are, and you lose yourself. In fact, you forget to eat. Time goes by and your loved one says, hey, you're coming for supper. Oh, what time is it? Wow, it's been 3 hours. You lost yourself in something you're passionate about. Imagine now if you can find that kind of alignment and be paid to do. Oh, I know, when I first got my first paycheck in psychology, I looked at it and thought, I'm getting paid for doing this? Like I've always had that passion. Yeah, I'm lucky. I mean, not everybody gets that. Well, that's right, and I think that that's where, going back to what you were saying earlier, it's about being introspective, you know, and I don't think it's too late. I think it really makes sense to take a moment now and say, okay, what am I passionate about, where is there a market, and where do I have the skill set, the authenticity, and but then they'll give you clarity, because normally there's a market of passion, but you may not have all the skill set. Great, then go and develop those. Right. And then you'll find also, as you're moving towards your area of passion, that even that studying or that course or that mentoring or apprenticeship that you'll be on won't even feel like work. Good, excellent advice. So creating a safe environment, right, obviously will make it a healthier environment that people will want to stay, right? The other piece that I see in that is when there's a safe environment, people are able to be more vulnerable. They're able to be more authentic. They're not afraid of, I call it the imposter syndrome. I don't want anyone to find out really what I'm like, right? So we put these walls up, we put these defenses up. So to be able to be more vulnerable, which then leads to being more creative, which then helps the company blossom, right? Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And it's that level of safety, and I believe the level of safety, yes, as leaders, as supervisors, managers, whatever, I don't believe we can motivate someone per se. However, I think one of the real burdens of leadership is to create the preconditions for self-motivation within all of our teammates.
Right.
Now, when we get to that level of self-motivation, it goes back to what you're saying, Cathy. It's that level of safety from within. When you find that level of safety from within, then it's so much easier to expand it out, and it's also easier to help your colleagues find it as well.
Oh, okay. In what way? How would you say
well,
that?
in just the way, by modeling up vulnerability with integrity is a great way to model. I call that a model of possibility for your coworkers.
Okay. Okay. Love it. Yes. Okay. So we've only got a few more minutes. So what else would you like to add on this topic? There's like hours and hours. Anything more on engagement? How an employer can be more engaging of employees, or what would you like
well,
to?
maybe I'll just share a quick example. I was recently reading this about Starbucks. Now, Starbucks, this is a fascinating story, what I read. It's all about engaging the baristas. The baristas are the people that serve up the coffee, right? Now, Starbucks, like any fast food, they have to watch their labor costs. So these are not high-paying jobs. I don't know, I think they make just slightly above minimum wage. But what's fascinating is if you look at typical coffee shops from a Tim Hortons or whatever, a lot of these will have higher turnover, which is typical of the service sector, higher turnover of staff. What's fascinating about most Starbucks is they have a much lower level of staff turnover.
Really?
Another interesting fact, when you look at the average North American adult, they'll read on average only one non-fiction book per year. Many fiction books, but only one non-fiction. So it's interesting, when you look at the baristas at Starbucks, they're reading 4, 5, 6 non-fiction books per year. So they're more well-read, they're more well-traveled, yet they're basically at minimum wage, and yet they have a lower level of turnover. Why? It's about, to me, it's about engaging, it's about alignment. See, one of the things when you start to talk to these baristas about what they care about fair trade, they care about coffee, they care about sustainable business practices. Now, I'm not saying that Starbucks is a perfect business, but this is an organization that really does try to provide a great product. They try to encourage sustainable business practices, and. So you can see why there's an alignment of cause to what the organization represents, what they're trying to do, even by removing some of the middlemen and going directly to creating a little, buying groups and cooperatives in Guatemala or whatever, so that the money goes directly to the producers, which is fantastic. They're setting up schools. Well, I tell you, if employees say, well, that's what I believe in, here's an organization that's really doing this as opposed to just a motherhood statement on the vision board or something, well, that is a great way to engage people.
Oh, absolutely.
So like-minded people want to hang out with other like-minded people. So an advice to organizations is, if you're passionate about something, if you stand for something, make sure it's not a best-kept secret. Don't just tell your customers. Let your staff know and let them be part of it.
Exactly, and they'll want to be
They want to be part of it, and they'll come up with great ideas.
Oh yeah, and listen to them. Listen to the great ideas.
Yes, and and one of the other things too on engagement is, if you have to give people feedback, praise publicly, but criticize privately.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that goes for, I think, anybody, right? In a family or... For sure.
In any relationship.
In any relationship.
You see, it's not about, when someone needs some sort of constructive feedback, it's not about them losing face. You don't want to ridicule somebody. However, when someone's done a good job, it is about reward and recognition. And people, as long as it's sincere, if it's done sincerely, people, they just feel so good about public praise. And again, there may be a shyer person, so you have to go into context and maybe you don't bring out the full band and everything else. But people do appreciate it when it's sincere and heartfelt.
Okay. One last point before we break. I'd like to talk just briefly about psychological hardiness. Is that something that you talk about in your companies, of helping people, like when we have a sense of control over things, when our life is more than just our careers and our jobs, we tend to have more hardiness when the times and challenges get rough, right?
Yeah, I use a similar term. I call that mental toughness.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think we're talking perhaps the same thing, but I'll give you a key word, and I heard this years ago, and I believe it was Brian Tracy that said this in the Phoenix Seminar, great program. What he said was, one of the most powerful expressions was responsibility. And he breaks it down, and basically says it means you have the ability to respond to whatever life throws to you, which means it may not have been your fault. You may have been, in a sense, the victim to a negative circumstance, but it is still your you are responsible for how you choose to respond to it. So do you or do you not have the ability to choose the right response. And that's empowerment.
That is.
See, the difference is the lack of that ability to respond the right way for yourself and for the circumstances means you become a victim as opposed to the victor.
Right. Okay.
And that's, to me, that's just a hallmark of mental toughness.
Oh, absolutely. Great. Well, the amazing points that we've had discussion today. Thank you so much, Denis, for joining us today.
Well, thank you for the opportunity. It's been fun.
Good. I'm glad.